Love and Thunder is the latest entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Was directed by Taika Waititi, based on a screenplay by Jennifer Caton Robinson, and it stars Chris Hemsworth, reprising his role once again as everybody's favorite space Viking. The film also features Natalie Portman returning as Jane Foster, and Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher, a new nemesis hell-bent on making all gods extinct. So, growing up I loved Marvel Comics, but Thor was never really one of my favorites. But I've been pleasantly surprised in recent years seeing all of these heroes translated into celluloid fantasies, and Thor has actually been kind of one of my favorite characters in the MCU. I've enjoyed Hemsworth's take on the character during his overall tenure, and I've enjoyed the visual styling of director Waititi in the last couple of entries, which is really the first thing that I'd kind of like to point out with these last two films, 2017's Ragnarok and of course this newest one, which is that they have just a kind of a visual style, a look that is distinctly their own, which serves to kind of, separate them from a lot of the other films in the MCU and gives them kind of their own sort of world inside the MCU. I'll go on record and say I truly stand just in awe of what Marvel has accomplished with the building of this universe and its overall scope and coherence. But, it's nice when a director kind of steps in and puts their own kind of visual stamp on these films, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it was like in the comics where, you had different artists who had different takes on various characters, and so the character might look like this in one book, but kind of look, totally different in another book. The characters were always the characters from the storytelling perspective, but you just might get a whole different kind of idea or representation of who these characters were through the eye of a different artist. And while I think it might be fair to say that perhaps Waititi's style may be an acquired taste, for me it more or less works just like a champ, you know what I mean? I love it, it's great. For me it basically screams like the 1980s, and it's almost like hair metal-esque titles, or it's very almost like neon use of colors. It's very rich, and it's layered in its look, and it's a very bright film. The colors almost like bleed out of the screen, and the lightning strikes from Thor are so vibrant, the electricity almost kind of seems like it might actually come right through the screen and just blow a hole in the back of the theater wall, you know what I mean? Now, to the story itself, this would kind of fall into the category of like an adventure of the month type of story. For those familiar with comics, like you'll get one of those like 18-issue like epic story arcs that'll tie into like other comic book characters. It just ties into the whole universe, brings everything together for some big calamity, and everybody saves the world with like 4 minutes left. Then they follow up with something smaller in scope for 1 or 2 issues, but that's like maybe more personal to the actual protagonist of any given book. Love and Thunder, I think, falls into the latter category. And while you do get a cameo from his homies, the Guardians of the Galaxy, this story is strictly a Thor story. We got us a god killer here. Thor's a god. Sounds kind of personal to me. What could go wrong, right? Gore the God Butcher. While a somewhat, one-dimensional character, he kind of lives and breathes and has this deep sort of almost kind of Emperor Palpatine-ish quality due exclusively to the brilliant performance of Christian Bale. He more or less just kind of takes what is a fairly cookie-cutter type of villain, and he runs with it. He commands this respect and this fear, and he brings depth and soul into this performance. And actually, it's a thing that in the hands of a lesser actor could have been a lot less memorable and generic than it was in the overall presentation of this film. Just to be clear though, by no means does this character actually stand out to me in the MCU, but by no means does it appear that Bale is phoning this one in. So, big definite shout out to him on this one. And I will say that Chris Hemsworth is still basically owning his interpretation of Thor, and seems to be very engaged in all of his scenes. Because, sometimes after an actor has played a character a few times, you can kind of see where they sort of start to fall asleep at the wheel, or just kind of start maybe going through the motions, so to speak. Daniel Craig! Spectre! Excuse me. Last 2 Bond films! Yeah, motherfucker, I totally went there. But Hemsworth, he still comes across as like 100% engaged in his character, and he brings, his A game to this latest entry. And that's no small feat when you stop for a moment to consider that he's played this character, I think, like 8 times now. Like, basically, he is to Thor what Hugh Jackman is to Wolverine. You know what I mean? Like, he is Thor. Could anybody else follow him on this character? And really just, it's kind of kudos to everybody in this film, as they all seem to play well off of one another, and the timing and all the performances are just on point, and everybody's supporting each other very well, and everybody hits their marks just outstandingly. However, there is one thing here, because It ain't all wine and roses and pats on the back and sucking each other's dicks with this one. So, in the actual storytelling, I noticed that this movie, it pretty much goes full-bore comedy in some cases to an almost like an absurd Monty Python-esque sort of extent. And don't get me wrong, for the most part, it really does work. The jokes and the humor, they generally land. Although I do feel like there could have been many moments in the film where a little bit of restraint could have been used, as there are more serious moments where the jokes don't really land and they really sort of kind of take away from the overall tone of that particular scene. But with that being said, there's really a handful of scenes where I feel like they maybe killed the mood that are just sprinkled throughout the film. But when it comes to the overall presentation, there are also those moments that are meant to really just tap you in the feels and hit you in a very significant, meaningful way. And those scenes actually work really well. So the ones that are really meant to get a kind of a very deep emotional response, they pull that emotional response. It's just that at certain moments in the film, the levity seems to kind of distract from the overall tension or drama. I mean, I guess there's a fine line between funny and engaging and being obnoxious, and Love and Thunder at times seems to kind of teeter on the brink of falling over the line to the wrong side. But by no means did it ruin the film for me. Ultimately, Thor Love and Thunder won't likely go down as one of the classics of the MCU, but it will go down as a notable entry on the resume of a director with a unique visual style. And, it's another win for Hemsworth in his ongoing portrayal of the character of Thor. And while it might come across as a little slapsticky at times, at the end of the day, it's just a really fun film to watch that keeps you kind of entertained and it never takes itself too seriously. I believe there's a lot worse ways you could be spending your time. Thor Love and Thunder is recommended. And this brings us to the conclusion of this episode of the Cinephiles. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video. Feel free to hit that like and subscribe button. And until next time, peace.